Now we can look at arranging strings in a disco or possibly funk direction. During the 70s, strings were an integral part of disco music, and in a certain way they were fulfilling the task of the brass instruments. In comparison, in rock or pop, the strings are in general more orchestral and epic in their use. So it's interesting to look into the techniques used in disco music in the style of the 70s. One thing to note is that you can use most libraries for creating disco string arrangements, as we are not looking for total authenticity in the classical sense of the word. What you do need, however, is a string library with good timing, as it's critical with anything to do with dance music, or in this case disco, that anything we add does not take away from the groove. So let's listen to what we've prepared. Hopefully you could hear that this is a very retro-sounding disco track. But of course, retro is modern these days. There will be any number of current releases that use this type of arrangement. In our arrangement, we have 2 drum patterns. If we listen to these 2 drum grooves together, we can hear that they sound fatter together rather than individually. Also, if we look at the editor, we can see that these are not 100% quantized. We quantized with a setting of 50%. So there is still a certain amount of groove rather than a strict, totally straight beat. Now we can listen to the bass, which is playing a very typical 70s style disco bass line. Once again, this wasn't quantized strictly. Next we have the guitar, which if I'm honest is not totally in time. But again, in the realms of this tutorial, this isn't so important. Next we have the electric piano. Again, this is classic 70s instrumentation. The instrument I'm going to use for playing the strings in is once again the Orchestral Essentials 2 library. And I'm using the same patch, but it's been doubled with the octave. The music is in C minor. And we can use the C melodic minor, or the C harmonic or C natural minor scales. So now let's try something. I have the volume up so that I could hear what I was playing and to get my idea sorted. But now we can lower it. And the interesting thing in this instrument was the half-tone drops. I'll add a touch of reverb to make them sound somewhat larger. Now I'll record. The balance could do with some work at certain points. Some sections are too loud, and I didn't play with enough velocity to trigger the half-tone drop at this point, so I'll simply edit it using the mouse. Overall, the sections with the half-tone drop are a touch too loud, but the rest seems fine to me. Some people might prefer to quantize something like this. If I was to do this, I would choose not to quantize it to 100%, but to something like 50%. And you do have to remember that in the 70s, everything was played more or less live, so 100% perfect timing was never going to happen. The other option you have is to layer the same strings with the second instrument. And as we described before, this will smooth over the timing somewhat. So let's listen one more time. If we look in the editor, we can see that I am in general always in front of the beat. Due to the way the strings sound, this is actually fine for me. If we look at the Orchestral Essentials instrument, we can see that I have the octaver activated. This is how I doubled the instrument an octave higher. Of course, one thing to consider would be that I could switch the octaver off and simply play the higher line in using the same library, but one octave higher. Once again, this is the kind of thing that can add realism and richness to the arrangement, as my timing will never be identical to the first line. So let's have a go. Now that it's recorded, let's have a listen to those strings. In my opinion, this sounds better. There's a certain amount of movement between the two instruments. Obviously, the choice of whether to use the library like this with the pitch down effect is a personal taste thing. But in my opinion, it suits the 70s disco style perfectly. And of course, will transfer to modern music equally well, as there are plenty of examples of modern music using all or some of the attributes of 70s disco. So that was our take on 70s disco string arrangements.